Welcome to Becoming Untriggered, a podcast brought to you by psychodynamic coaches and parents of three, Lavinia Brown and Andrew Lynn.
Together we normalise and unpack common challenges faced by couples and parents, explore how these could be symptoms of unprocessed trauma, and support you with the tried and tested tools for you to show up as the mum or dad, partner, and person you deserve to be. Welcome to Becoming Untriggered podcast. Today we're going to look at defiance, disobedience, disrespect, rudeness, and how triggering that can feel as an adult and where the root cause of that trigger might be so that you can heal this, so that this behavior is, still annoying, but it's no longer going to create that disproportionate reaction in you.
Yeah, it's a common one for a lot of our clients. Almost always the inner child is involved. Like you said, it's a trigger. But actually, I've certainly been through this journey with a lot of my clients. And what starts as a trigger, triggers anger, triggers annoyance, triggers frustration. Actually, once you work through this stuff, you start to see it as a bit of a quality, almost like a positive thing, because your children, in fact, are owning their truth. They feel safe enough to vocalize what they want. And that can often be the opposite of what you want in that situation.
Or the opposite of what you were allowed to feel, which I think is the most obvious link. I think most people can see that root cause, and we're going to go into different root causes, which are a little bit more subtle. But the most obvious one is your inner child essentially feeling jealous. And that jealousy isn't something to be underestimated. An inner child's jealousy is ferocious. Basically, the degree to which your inner child is angry and jealous is going to be in direct proportion to the degree to which you and your needs were repressed. So that's significant. And that repression is going to lead to this intense force with which you want to repress, in turn, your actual child for daring to express what you weren't able to express as a child.
Yeah, that's the obvious one. Often comes out in conflict. So you're already slightly hijacked and there's a bit of conflict in the house, and then your child will vocalize their needs. They will disagree with you. They'll be disobedient. They might even be rude. And like you said, that will then open the box of all of that repressed anger from the moments that you experienced that as a child. There's the old phrases like, it's just my way or the highway, or you do what you're told just because I want you to do it. And that's where the frustration and the anger is normally repressed.
Because I said so.
Because I said so.
I got spanked if I didn't. So there was always the threat of pain, physical pain. It's not just that we weren't allowed to do it, it's that we had to then repress ourselves. It's that effort that went into repressing ourselves out of fear of the consequences. And we don't see that effort being mirrored in our children. It's like, what? Hold on. I had to man up. I had to be strong. I wasn't allowed to show vulnerability and whine and moan and be defiant. You need to. It's carrying on those totally unrealistic, age-inappropriate expectations that were placed on you onto your child. And just to come back to your earlier point, it's kind of Victorian. Children should be seen and not heard. I actually was told that many times. And it was a real expectation in my house that any kind of childlike behavior was not acceptable. You had to be a mini adult. I don't think mothers, the ones I work with, actually realize that that's what children are. I've had to say this several times this week, saying, when your child throws things, like one woman said to me just the other day, I don't know where he gets it from. He just throws things and I don't do that. So where's he got it from? And I'd say, it's normal.
He's a kid.
He's frustrated. So he's throwing something. You probably weren't allowed to throw something. But what you're seeing in your child that is triggering you, that is normal behavior. That's what children are, boisterous, noisy, kind of violent. They break things. That's all okay. But if you've had the childhood where you had to be seen and not heard, you don't realize what you should have been. That's how bad the repression was.
And that's getting back to the essence of really what trauma is. You've got to repress the emotion of actually being repressed in that moment. And then you've got to change your character to fit in. So all of it's coming up. All of it is being shown. The mirror is being shown with your child's independence. Because that's what it is in that moment. It's not defiance. You feel it's defiance. You feel it's rude, but they're just being independent. They're just being themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what you weren't allowed to do at the core.
That's the gift that actually, like you said at the beginning, that's the gift that you have given them. You've created the space for them to be able to feel safe enough to be independent, to express their needs.
But the problem is when you're triggered, you try and shut it down. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, because it's power play. And that's the second thing I want to talk about. If there's power play, and therefore this whole notion of disobedience or defiance comes in, then that means you've set yourself up as some kind of authority. There's a hierarchy there and you are top dog. And therefore that child is not towing the party line. But you have to look at why that sense of authority is there. Yes, you may be role modeling what your parents did, probably. Or you may come from a culture, for example, a lot of Eastern cultures, Asian cultures, it's totally accepted. It's not even like a rule. It just is that elders are correct, that you don't judge, that you don't question an elder's authority. But if you are then choosing to carry that forwards, you have to think about why. And often, not always, but often, if you're putting in some kind of hierarchy where there's a bit of power play, then that means you're not feeling grounded and secure in your authority. You're not feeling safe. You're scared. And so you're becoming more and more coercive, more and more strict to try and clamp down or narrow the boundaries of what might happen because you don't feel safe in that moment.
Yeah. So in theory, I agree that elders should have the authority and parents should be the authority. But that's in a very isolated case where there's no generational trauma and the elders have done the work.
I think there's a difference between wisdom and authority. I think elders can be respected, should be, for their wisdom and experience. But that doesn't mean that they're always right.
They don't have to be right, but with experience does come knowledge. I don't think you have to blindly follow them at all, but there should be a hierarchy. And I think there's a problem at the moment that the younger generation don't respect older generations. And it might be as a result of the elder generations not deserving respect in some way. If you're triggered, if you're imposing rules that you can't explain why, if you're repressing people for no good reason, then you're going to lose respect. Like, young people don't have any respect and you should respect your elders. Yes, I think that is right, but that's an idealist way to look at it. And you can only promote that if you've done your work, if you are laying down rules that you can explain that are for the best of everybody.
Well, it's kind of playing into that myth that children should be grateful for what you're doing for them. That's kind of assuming this role of wisdom. And I think, like you said, respect needs to be earned. It's not a given.
No, but I think children are more intelligent than we give them credit for. If I tell the children to do something, then I need to have a reason to do that. I respect them enough to have a good reason for doing something. And I want to know that if I am guiding them, there's a reason behind that. Whereas I think lots of people try and set boundaries and try and set rules and try and be authoritarian when they're not actually doing it for the benefit of the children. They're doing it for the benefit of them.
Or, as we started this particular conversation, it's because they don't feel safe.
Yeah, but then you can't explain your reasoning behind it. And that's when you have to repress them and just say, well, that's what I want. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, totally. And you can't expect them to then be grateful for what you're doing for them because, like you said, there's no reason behind it.
Then it will turn into power play.
Yeah, so it's about grounding yourself enough that you don't need to get into power play. Understanding yourself enough to know where you're coming from in the first place, being reliable, having certain values that you stick to that aren't arbitrary. All of my clients experience parents whose rules were arbitrary, inconsistent,
punitive, like really massive punishments for small things.
Yeah. Or nothing was done until the behavior was so extreme, inverted commas, and you were come down upon with like a ton of bricks. Whereas actually it should have been addressed way before then. And it was probably partly because of their neglect.
Back to like how that works out in the defiance. This is a really interesting point because I've been talking to a few people about it recently because it's linked to boundaries. If you put boundaries in for yourself because you feel unsafe, so you need boundaries for control, then the boundaries can create conflict because there isn't a good reason to put the boundary in place from the child's point of view. Therefore, you're fighting. But if you're putting the boundary in place for your child's benefit, then when they're defiant, if they push back on it, then you're able to say, I'm doing this for you. You might not understand it, but this is a reason I'm doing it for you. And then you're not going to be triggered by any of their defiance because you're solid, you're safe in your reasoning.
Yeah, totally. So it comes back to feeling safe. Your inner child can't be in the driving seat of your parenting. Another root cause of this trigger, in particular defiance, disobedience, is taking your child's behavior as a reflection of their feelings for you. So basically your worth as a parent is linked to your worth as a person. So you are taking how your child is behaving, what they're saying, what they're doing, their mean words, they're throwing things, whatever it is, as a personal attack on the quality of your being, personality, ideals, values, whatever.
I think a lot of people are in that position. I think everybody that comes into parenting with their self-worth on the outside, so the external has the ability to affect your self-worth, then your child's behavior is going to be affected by that.
If you don't have that self-worth already, innately, because your parents weren't able to give it to you, you're actually going to end up projecting, a lot of my clients do this, you're projecting your parents onto your child. If your mother was highly critical of you, for example, and would undermine you, you are going to feel the same way as your mother made you feel when your child undermines you or says they don't want to do something. And you're going to be taken back to that part of you that felt rubbish when you were 8 or 6 or 10, which means that 8, 6 or 10-year-old is then parenting in that moment, which leads to disaster because you can't parent from your 8-year-old. So your worth can't be linked to your child's behavior, and yet it's so easy to slip into. And if you don't feel you do it on your own, some way that I think everyone falls into this trap is when you've got an audience in the supermarket, in a shop, at a school gathering, at the parents-in-laws, oh my word, classic, feeling like other people are going to judge you as a bad person for your child's behavior. Because if that child really loved you, if that child was being good, then they wouldn't behave like that.
The most common side effect I see of this is actually, you might call it good parenting, but it's parents that care. So they think that their self-worth, they're like, okay, I didn't have a great childhood, or even if I did have a good childhood, my self-worth is tied into being a good parent. So they have the intention to be a really good parent. And that comes across in a lot of stuff, like a lot of trying to learn, a lot of trying to do it right. But I think the problem occurs with perfectionism in that. When you're not a good parent, when you're not in control, when you perceive you're not doing well, which might only be 5% of the time, that almost sabotaging the rest of it because it's so explosive.
Yeah, totally. It's like, I haven't done enough because if I had, my child would act perfectly. I have the capacity to be a perfect parent. There's the flaw, because no one does. I have the capacity to be perfect, and therefore I am falling short, and here's the result.
And it's that 5% that you're not doing brilliantly that makes you anxious for the 95% of the time. Some of it is acceptance that you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay. And then the other bit is looking at your self-worth and addressing that, internalizing that, taking control of that.
Yeah, and going back to parents-in-law or having an audience, it's, again, projecting old childhood fears that you're being judged and the pain that led to onto other people. Oh, they're judging me. They're judging my child's behavior. And I even had this with the bloody dog. At the recent dog training I went to, my dog was the one that was barking nonstop so that no one could hear what the instructor was saying. I ended up bursting into tears It was so traumatic and dysregulating to be like, oh my God, I'm responsible for this bad behavior. And now everyone's looking at me. No one can hear. I just went off on a complete spiral in my head. I want to touch on another quite subtle root cause, and that's religion, religious overtones to the notion of obedience. So obviously we've got the 10 Commandments, we've got thou shalt not disobey. If you grew up in a religious culture, society, family, then it could be that this sense of disobedience has got a lot more traction in it, a lot more good, evil, good, bad connotations around it. And therefore it becomes more loaded, and therefore it becomes something with already the potential for a trigger, because it's not just normal behavior. It's something that has an added layer of meaning that is linked to ideals such as good and evil. So that's one to kind of be really aware of in terms of the household that you grew up in and whether obedience was an ideal or not.
I've certainly had clients from a religious background that have not come into this process with any concept of religious trauma. But actually, once you explore the repressed emotions of the child, there's a feeling of, and the visual that comes up a lot is these list of rules. They're not the parents' rules, so it's not like parental trauma. There's a list of rules that are like on the wall of you need to act like this, you need to act like this, and the consequences are big. It's like heaven, hell, good, bad, good, evil, whatever. So the child automatically feels one of these things that's on the wall that's bad. Then there's a self-diagnosis of bad, and then there's a repression of that emotion because you're not allowed to feel that way. And like I said, some of it is around being a good person, being obedient.
Yeah, so it's being aware of what you're bringing to the table in terms of what a certain behavior means to you on a bigger level. Is defiance just defiance? Is defiance culturally unacceptable because you come from an Asian, for example, culture where elders must be respected? Is it a religious belief? What does disobedience, defiance, rudeness mean for you? And how are you perhaps unconsciously expecting your child to know this somehow, which obviously it can't know because it's not aware. It's a child just doing its thing. Then there's a last point, which you pointed out when we were talking about it earlier, is unconditional love. This kind of notion that there's a contract, an unspoken contract between you and your child, that your child needs to behave a certain way in return for your affection and love, which is actually really dysfunctional, because then that gives you the right to withdraw that connection and love and approval whenever you think that that contract has been broken. And this is where the silent treatment comes in. This is where spanking comes in. This is where being sent to your room comes in. It's the withdrawal of connection, which is absolutely crucial to your sense of worth and self and love. It's a poisonous way of punishing a child.
Yeah, I think so many people fall into this trap. I think it's really difficult not to. But the opposite side of that is also encouraging certain behaviors, only giving them love if they succeed, only giving them love when they do well. You have to work hard. You have to be successful. You have to do this for me to love you. And if you don't, you're being disobedient, so I'm going to withhold the love. And it's really hard for people to do that, to not shape, to not encourage, to not incentivize certain types of behaviors. But actually, that's what you're doing. You're giving them conditional love in those moments.
It's what we talked about last week, right? In the episode that just came out, personality type or trauma response. If the gap between the normal love and affection that you give your child and the love and affection that you give them when they do something good or something bad, if that gap is big, then you're going to incentivize certain types of behavior. Ideally, you are connected to your child, you're affectionate with your child, you're showing them love and praise to a certain degree all the time. So when they do something really good or really bad, there's not too much of a variation.
Yeah, so if you want to raise your children without them just being the characters that you want to create, if you want them to be independent, if you want them to know what happiness means for them and follow their joy and be authentic, then you need to accept that there's going to be some disobedience or conflict or whatever, because they're individuals. We live in a house with 5 individuals that want to do different things. So you can't move as one. The whole thing about disobedience, I come back to the point earlier, which I think is a good one. Like, if you can, in that moment of conflict, if you can justify why you're trying to shape that person, why you're trying to lay down a rule, why you're trying to change the trajectory of this child, because the child generally just does what they want all the time. They'll either stay in bed all day if that's what they want, or they'll watch TV all day. They'll just do what they want to do. It might not be that extreme. So if you want to put a boundary in, if you want to put something in place to change that direction, you need to have a reason for it that you can communicate in that moment. And even if there is conflict at that point, then you can be solid in your parenting. You don't just need to put down a boundary that's got no foundation.
Yeah, so basically it's about remembering that just because your children are behaving in a certain way does not mean that that is not natural behavior for a child. If you've had a very restrictive, repressed, authoritarian childhood, you're probably not going to have done many of the things that your child is going to show you. That's actually a good sign. It means that you've created a safe enough environment for them to test out who they are. Doesn't mean that you don't lay boundaries. Like you said, we lay boundaries and we give good reasons for them. But we have to give good reason from that place of safety and grounding. If not, you're going to go into power play. And as we all know, if you're tired, overwhelmed, hungry, stressed, it's so much easier to fall into that. So again, if you're worried about judgment in the supermarket, your parents-in-law, come back to feeling safe in yourself. And I find this actually, I got into mini power plays quite a lot with one of our children. And I have to kind of just stop and go, hold on, what are they actually saying? Because actually their argument's quite good. And part of me does not want to listen. Part of me just wants to say, I've said no, I'm not saying it again. And there's another part of me that's going, they just made a good point. And I'm like, I'm going to have to stop, backtrack now. And I'm busy and I don't want to. I don't want to invest the time in this mental wrangling. Always checking in. Why am I saying something? And am I coming from a safe place? Do I feel grounded when I'm saying it? Or am I just talking?
Am I angry? Am I hijacked by an emotion? I did a session with a client last week who came into it with this situation. So Defiance made him angry. The father threw a teddy at like a 3-year-old. So he came into the session with that, processed the anger, and then, like I made in the first point, his view of that situation went from anger and defiance to, that's a positive thing. My son is defiant. He's standing up for himself. He's asking for his needs to be met. That's a really good thing.
And backing down is great role modeling, right? You need to be able to pivot in a business sense, in an emotional sense. It's not a bad thing, but we weren't usually role modeled that. We were spanked, hit, sent to our room. So to be able to pivot, which takes a lot of courage and a lot of vulnerability, and to show your child that you're doing that, you're actually diffusing this for the future. You won't get into a power play. There won't be conflict. There will be collaboration and discussion. So it's all good.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to build the relationship. Because if your child's coming up with a logical argument and they're getting pushed back all the time, they're just going to think, well, there's no point. There's no point in my logic. There's no point in me putting together an argument and putting it forward. My needs are just not going to be met.
Which leads to the belief, no one listens.
Yeah, no one listens. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. So that's where some trauma comes in.
So in short, this is normal behavior. Need to feel grounded. You need to feel safe when you're discussing anything with your children. We don't want your inner child in the driving seat. And from that place, vulnerability, pivoting, basically there's no room and there's no need for authoritarianism. If what we discussed was helpful, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. For more of the same, check out my social media, The Inner Child Healing Expert, or to work with me, go to laviniabrown.com.
You can find me on andrewlynn.net or Life Coach for Dads on Instagram. We work with both individuals and couples. If there are any topics you'd like us to cover, please reach out. Thanks for listening.